America, this is Mark A back in effect. Mark A stay in effect. Mark A will always be in effect.
Life is a bus, so the service a must. They make you turn up your phone before you get off the bus and make you wanna go home, dog. There's nowhere to run, so you must sleep through day 0 to get to day 1. And 9 weeks later.
What's up, everybody? This is Mark A back in effect, stay in effect, and always will be in effect. Yo, today we are in Ruska, Texas. Ruska, Texas, right? Ruska, Texas. Cycle, Texas. Okay? And I'm here with the Field Artillery Command Sergeant retired Parsons, Berk Parsons, and his lovely wife, Kelly. Okay? And today we're gonna, talk about his career, his predominant career, 33 years of experience, 33 years of deployments, 33 years of mentoring soldiers, enhancing seniors, and also officers. Okay? Thank you for inviting us over to your beautiful home. Sergeant Major. I'm gonna call you Sergeant Major because to me that's a PhD. When you a Sergeant Major, Command Sergeant Major, especially at a nominal level, that is a PhD to me in my book. Okay, and I know to the force out there, that's a PhD to you because that's where you guys want to be. Okay, yeah, we're sitting here drinking a little something, we chop it up and just talk about old times. Okay, hey, I'm gonna introduce you to my man.
What's up?
Co-host, Salty Staff Sergeant. Okay, hey, he's gonna be with me from here on out. All right, that's my co-host from here on out. Okay, hey, Sergeant Major, I just want to let you know again. Thank you for inviting us over to your lovely home, and thank you, Kelly.
Yes, sir.
Tell me where it all began, man.
Well, so I enlisted in 1985. Joined the Army between my junior and senior year in high school on the late entry program.
Mm-hmm.
3 days after my high school graduation, I was on a bus down to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And from there, did my one station unit training there. Went to Airborne School at Fort Benning, and then my first unit assignment was 1st of 319th at Fort Bragg.
Now, what made you stay? Because obviously you got enlistment, 3 years, 4 years, or 2 years, or whatnot. What made you stay in, or did you stay in?
Well, so my original enlistment was 4 years.
Uh-huh.
After 2 years in 1st 319th, I got orders to go to Vicenza, Italy, and at the time was kind of unusual, but they were hurting for soldiers, and they were actually at Fort Bragg recruiting to try to fill some folks out there, fill some airborne positions out there in Delta Battery.
Mm.
And but I was lucky enough that me and a couple other guys had come down on assignment for there. So while I was over in Vicenza, spent 2 years there, and my last year I was getting ready to ETS, and they offered me a extension. So I extended over there for a year. So after my initial 5 years, I did get out of the Army. Because growing up, I just thought military service is what everybody did, and I was going to come, give my contribution and then go out there in the world and do whatever it is I was supposed to do. And so I got out and went back home. Kelly and I were together, got a union job. I was hired solely on the fact that, well, 2 facts. So to get a union job, you have to know people in the union, and my father worked in part of the union, not where I was getting the job. So when I went in to do my job interview, the only skills that I could put as a 13 series on my resume was I could drive a 2.5-ton truck. So they didn't need a whole lot of Fox or Bravo experience working in a paper mill. But what I did tell them is that during my interview is that one thing that the Army had taught me is that I'm not scared of physical labor. I can work with a team or I can work by myself. And I'll work whatever hours you want me to work. And so it was almost like being on a promotion board, because there was like the human resources, there was this shop steward, and then the union boss, and then there was 5 or 6 people sitting there. And so the guy told me, he's like, he goes, there's 30 other applicants for this one position.
Uh-huh.
He said, but we're going to hire you just based on that answer. So I was like, okay, it works for me. And
I'll take it.
So I got the job, and it wasn't much different than really working in the Army because we had a crew. It was a machine tender, and the assistant machine tender, a utility guy, box puller. It was like almost being on a howitzer crew. And everybody had their job. And in spare time, I would train on the next job above me, just like we do in artillery.
Yeah.
And so after a short period of time, I learned the 2 jobs above me. So if someone would call in sick or, wouldn't show up for work, they'd move me up to that position, and I'd work that position. I'd do my regular shift and then work a second shift overtime. Of course, everything was double time or time and a half, I did that for about 6 months. And like the guys I worked with, but, I started thinking about it. It's like these guys have got to do this job for another 30 years before they're even close to retiring. And I missed everything that you talk about, you hate about the Army. It's like, I hate putting up camouflage nets. I don't want to be cold or whatever the reason is. There was a lot of stuff I did miss, and so I started thinking about going back in the Army. And of course, I thought Kelly wanted me to stay out of the Army. She never wanted me to get out, and it was one of those great early relationship communication things, So finally one day I just got up the backbone to say, hey, what would you think if I went back in the Army? And the look of relief on her face was like, I'd love you to go.
So I guess get.
So I called up the local recruiter, and or I went to the recruiting station, I think, and they said they were not taking prior service. I was like, well, what do I have to do if you do take prior service? So you got to take ASVAB again and retake your physical. I was like, well, all right, I'll do that. So he told me when the ASVAB was, and I drove to the place and took my ASVAB, and told me when my physical was. I drove to the MEPS and took my physical. And I guess it was about a month later, I got a phone call because Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait, and they were looking for 13 Bravos. So I was like, when do I got to be there? And I think I had a report date at like the end of September. So we decided to go ahead and get married on the 15th. So that was payday, so I could remember our anniversary. 2 days later, we packed everything that we owned in the back of my Chevy truck and drove to Fort Bragg, and got us a house down there. And I deployed probably about maybe a month after we got down there, and went to Desert Storm.
Wow. Kelly, when he was going, like the transition of like, okay, 1 minute you're a civilian, next minute, okay, he's in the Army, and then a month later he's gone. Like, how did you feel? Like,
well, I grew up in the military. I was an Army brat, so very familiar with the lifestyle and whatnot. It wasn't necessarily that I wanted him to go back in, but I never told him I wanted him to get out. So I just kind of went with it, and we ended up back at Bragg, and I had family there, so it helped him going that quick. But you just dealt with it, and so unfortunately, he wasn't. He was one of the last to go and first to come back. So, so we didn't have to go through, a year like some of the 82nd had to do.
Yeah.
So I didn't have an issue with it. Yeah.
Okay. Now, what would you say, like, for instance, a young spouse, okay? Like, what a young spouse, like, certain things that you did while he was gone, like, like went to school, went to work, or,
So,
at that time, you didn't have children, right? You didn't have
no, we didn't have any kids. Yeah. And so I went to work, and we got downsized because most of Fort Bragg was gone. So a lot of businesses had to close down, and I happened to have chose one that did. They cut. I don't know if they cut. I think they were just cutting back. So I got cut. One of those last come first go.
First go, yeah.
So after that, I decided to take some classes on post. That was offered through, I think it was ACS. And so I did that. I'm going to date myself because it was computerized typing.
Okay.
or something like that. And so, and then after that was done, I think I got a little certificate. But
Is that when they had the bird that would peck on the stone like the Flintstones?
Yeah. Exactly. But anyway, so while I was up at ACS, they needed volunteers. So I was like, well, I could do that. Yeah, that's not a problem. And so I volunteered within the ACS, did multiple things. Like they had a employment assistance. So I did that. Then they threw me in there by myself because the lady that ran it was out on maternity leave. So I'm like, okay. So I just winged it and got through that, and then helped out with the call center when the soldiers were coming back from Kuwait, which was kind of comical. I mean, but I grew up there, so it was kind of comical to get some of the phone calls say, well, they said the 82nd's coming back. Why isn't my son on that plane? I think people have, they don't understand how large the 82nd is.
Yeah.
You know, Fort Bragg is a city within itself.
Absolutely.
But everybody lives in that small isolation where it's me and mine.
Yeah.
Right, right.
80
And
seconds
so,
is just me and mine.
and so some of the parents didn't understand, you know, where their soldier, you know, what they were a part of.
Yeah.
Those are the same folks that be like, oh, you're in the Army? My cousin Bob's in the Army.
Right.
Yeah,
Oh,
you know,
okay.
yeah.
It's like, yeah, okay, there's so many Bobs you know in the army.
Right.
Right.
Maybe,
So, but that
maybe you
kinda
know
started
Jim.
off- Yeah, right.
No, I don't know Jim.
But I saw a need of volunteering
Volunteering.
within the Army and, you know, different organizations and stuff like that. And I was like, well, I could do that.
Wow.
So,
So it just kept yourself busy and, you know,
It did.
just keep your mind going.
right. I mean, so back then we really didn't know how long.
Yeah.
So you really couldn't plan anything. But,
And this
you
was
know,
back in the days before, you know, they had the robust FRG system.
Yeah.
so there
Right,
wasn't an
right,
FRG.
Right, they had
Or,
no
well,
FRG.
and back then it was FSG.
Yes.
And then they didn't have I forget what the position they call it now, but they have
The
this,
FRSAs.
the frizzas and all that. They didn't have it.
Yeah.
Right.
So, you know, you deployed.
That was it.
And it was quite often where it's like, you know, I'd get and this is back in the day, you know, before cell phones and everything, is, you know, you'd be on alert.
Yeah.
You'd have
2
2-hour recall.
Yeah, 2 hour recall.
And so if you
They're
wanted,
doing that now, right now.
if you wanted to go to, you know, you wanted to go shopping at the shopping mall, every 30 minutes you had to go find a payphone and call a unit, hey, is anything going on?
Yeah.
And so the first few years that I was in the Army, you know, I was in units where, you know, if I got a phone call and went somewhere, if she didn't hear from me in 72 hours, she knew to go get my truck and bring it back to the house. 'Cause I wasn't coming home for a little while.
Right.
But fortunately, that didn't happen. And I guess your first deployment, so because of the jobs he had been in, we didn't hit the major deployments until we got to Hawaii.
To the line.
And so by then, you know, you knew to an extent, you knew how long they were gone. And you kind of just planned for that. Like his first one was 18 months long.
That was when you were the 25th?
Yeah.
That was the Sergeant Major? You were the first one or Sergeant Major?
I was, I got there the first tour. We did a 15-month tour.
That's with Casolo.
What's that?
That's with Casolo?
No.
Casolo? Oh, that
No,
was with Casolo?
Solo was there my second tour. So we got to Hawaii. I went to I was back at Bragg again. And then as a first sergeant. And the HIMARS, I was in 327. And we had a HIMARS platoon in Charlie Batter. It was the only HIMARS at the time. And we were doing rotations to Afghanistan with that platoon. And so I was going to go to Afghanistan as the senior NCO. Basically, I just wanted to deploy. And my sergeant major was fighting me the whole time because I was the headquarters first sergeant at the time. So, but I was also on jump status too, you know. So it's like I was looking for all this excitement, you know. And there's a whole other story how I got that job, but I ended up going to the Sergeant Major Academy. I came down on orders to go to the Sergeant Major Academy, and that was my sergeant major's way of saying, there's no way you're going to Afghanistan, you know. I was like, I'll be back in plenty of time.
Yeah.
But when I went from the Sergeant Major Academy, thought for sure I was coming back to Bragg. Because I had been at Bragg almost my whole career. I think I'd been in all but 2 battalions at some time or another on Fort Bragg, both in 18th Field Artillery Brigade and Division, 82nd. And so I'm at the Sergeant Major Academy, and we had, before we left, about 6 months before I went to the academy, we bought our retirement home. Because I just knew I was going back to Fort Bragg.
That was the trend. Every other duty station.
Every
With the airborne status, you're going to use 173rd.
I went to recruiting. I went back to Bragg.
Oh, you went to recruiting? That's right. You was in recruiting.
I went to.
Oh, that's another story.
Where else?
Trust me, I know.
I went somewhere else. Came back to Bragg. It was always just
right back to Bragg.
there.
Right.
And
So why
which
not
was-
this time?
which was great because we had a house and all that. But I was like, well, you know, she was looking to do comps. We were selling our house, I think, and she found this really nice house that she liked. So we bought it for our retirement home because I figured I was coming back there. I was going to retire there. So I go to the Sergeant's Major Academy, and the Brigade Sergeant Major, everybody in the food chain in the 18th Airborne Corps was in agreement that I was going to go to the Sergeant Major Academy, and I was going to come back and take over 327 as a Sergeant Major. Because back in the day, we didn't have the selection process, you know. It was like, so that was the thing. I was going to come back to Bragg, and I was going to take over that battalion. So we bought the house, go to the academy, and they come down and do your orders at the Sergeant Major Academy. You know, you talk to everybody. So I go and talk to the guy from 18th Airborne Corps, you know, and I'm like, hey. And he's like, yeah, we're good. You know? So then I start getting phone calls about I got to pick an assignment because they were doing a testing program on, you know, it was some kind of pilot program that they were starting with the Sergeant Major Academy. About, you know, they at a certain time they would post what assignments were available, and you go on and take what assignment
It's
preference
the
you
officer
find,
type of way.
Right,
Yes.
right.
Yes.
And so I was like, well, I'm going back to Bragg anyways, you know, so it'll be on there because I knew there was a vacancy. I already had all the Sergeant Major positions at Fort Bragg, what was coming open, you know, we had a, because Sergeant Major High, it was the Field Artillery
Sergeant Major High. I know him. Sergeant Major High.
He came down and talked to all of us, and he showed us where every single vacancy was across the Army. So if we wanted to work an assignment, you know, we could work on that. So the whole time I'm sitting there fat and happy thinking I'm going back to Bragg, and I get a phone call from the Brigade Sergeant Major, 18th FA Brigade Sergeant Major. He's like, what did you do? And I'm like, Sergeant Major, what are you talking about? He's like, I don't know who you pissed off, he said, but I just called Branch to make sure that you were coming back here. And they told me there's no way in hell Parsons is going back to Fort Bragg.
Because they caught up with how many times you've been there.
So, and I don't know if it was something personal with the guy that was there. Because at the time I was still a Master Sergeant. So I wasn't under Sergeant Major's branch. I was still, and the guy that was at Branch at the time, I'm not going to mention his name because someone will know him once. But
You know, around the same time structure, right?
They know.
I had never called Branch in my entire career. I just went where, you know, I get orders and I'd go wherever and just make the best of it. But this was the time that the one time that I called. So I called the guy and I'm like, hey, what's going on? He's like, oh, you can't go, you know, to Fort Bragg because there's no vacancies. So I pulled out my little notes from Sergeant Major High. I was like, what about this job? What about that job? And I named about 7 or 8 Sergeant Major positions that were opening at Bragg. Nope, not going to do it. Nope. So they kept pushing me because I hadn't made my selections in the in the pilot program, right? And it wasn't asked.
Well, it was the new one.
Yeah, there's a program that the officers pick, and they pick the top.
Well, yeah, we have the same thing too. It's
Actually, you do.
Your marketplace. Your marketplace.
So the guy was like calling my house while I was at the academy, you know, and I wouldn't take his phone calls. I'm like, no, I'm not talking to that guy. So one day I was home I think I came home for lunch, and she handed me the phone, and it's this guy. And I'm like, dude. He's like, well, you got to pick an assignment. I said, I don't got to do anything. I said, because I looked on the assignments, and what you have available for us to choose from is not even 1/3 of the list of what's vacant.
And what's actually available.
Because Field Artillery Branch already briefed us.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I was like, look, dude, I was like, you have like 2 assignments to Korea and another like weird Herald assignment down there. I was like, I'm not going to screw myself. I was like, you're going to have to screw me because I'm not doing it. I'm not picking one.
Yeah.
So just put me on assignment. And I hung up the phone.
Yeah.
This was on a Friday. So I hung up the phone and looked at her. I was like, well, I guess I'm going to Korea.
That's what most times they go to.
So Monday
Here we go.
we go to class, and they were handing out assignments Monday afternoon. They're handing out orders. I get orders to Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. And I'm like,
That's what's up.
if I knew this, I would have cussed them out years ago.
Yep.
But
That's
that was
what we gotta do. Okay.
I went from there, we got there. I think I got there in June. Graduated in May, got there in June. We went right to NTC for like a 2.5 month rotation. It was like extremely because it was the first Stryker Brigade rotation. So
No, 2-8.
that was 225. Yeah, I was a 211 Field Artillery.
Yeah.
Because we had to go. We had to do like all the. They had been fenced for 2 years doing Stryker fielding, so we had to go do all the Stryker gunnery, all that stuff leading up to it, and then do the actual MRE. And came back for a month, and then deployed on a 15-month. We were like one of the first ones deployed where we knew it was a 15-month tour. The guys we replaced were there for 12 months. They were packed up, ready to go, and told, "Nope, you're staying."
Some of them
So that
even
was-
made it
that
home.
was my first deployment.
I was in Alaska.
Yes.
That happened in Alaska in 2007.
So they were all
6,
a
7,
little
7,
disgruntled when we got there, but did that 15-month tour. It was the operations army. I got promoted in October, right before we deployed. So I was the Ops Star Major because in the Stryker brigades, the Field Artillery Battalion, it was actually a Sergeant Major position.
Yeah.
So deployed as the Ops Sergeant Major for 15 months, and then so we were coming back, and I didn't know where my next assignment was going to be because I was promotable. I came down on the CSM back before the CSL days.
Yeah.
But I came down on the CSM list, and so I was like, well, I knew I had to leave because there's 2 Field Artillery battalions there, and there's already guys there. So we come home, and it was kind of like, hey, don't unpack because don't know where we're going. And I was sponsoring my replacement, and I was on leave, deployment leave, or end of tour, or whatever we called it. The leave after.
Not the R&R, but yeah.
Yeah, just when we got back.
Post-deployment.
There you go,
Yeah.
post-deployment leave. And so my sponsor, I get this email from my sponsor, or from the guy that I was sponsoring. He's like, hey, I'm not coming there now. I'm going to 3-7. And my brigade sergeant major, Carl Morgan, it was CC'd on it. So I called Carl, and I'm like, I was on leave. I'm like, hey, what's going on, man? I was like, this guy's not coming. Who's going to replace me?
Yeah.
He's like, well, he said, one thing is they're doing away with the sergeant major position in, because they had to do strength management.
Yeah.
So they're doing away with that ops sergeant major position. I was like, well, okay, so where am I going? He's like, you're taking the battalion. And I was like, when were you going to let me know?
Yeah. Thanks for dialing me in on
And
this.
his words were like, well, I didn't want to bother you on leave. I'm like, Carl, you've called me at 2 o'clock in the morning just to shoot the shit. And here I got, my family, they still got stuff boxed up. We haven't unpacked. We got there, I deployed, and we didn't know what was going on. And so he's like, no, you're going to stay there and take the battalion. So I ended up 5 years in that same battalion.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
And, but it was great. I mean, we loved it there.
You saved a fortune on t-shirts.
Yeah. I didn't have to buy new t-shirts. But, I mean, out of that 5 years, because right after I took over, we refit and retrained and we deployed for another 12-month tour. That's when Crisolo was with me. But of the 5 years that I was stationed with the 25th, I was only on island for about 18 months total.
Wow.
Yeah, that wasn't at one time.
Yeah, it was breakups. Yeah.
The rest of that was, it was like we said, 2 months of NTC. My first 2 years there,
Big Island, NTC.
I was only home for 3 months in my first 2 years.
Yeah. So it was like the Big Island, NTC, or JRTC. They come back. Yeah, I remember that. Yep. So along your path, like you're talking about, from the time you came back in the Army up until you made Sergeant Major, right? Like along that path, like did you have any mentors or anybody to kind of guide you of like, not branch, because nobody really calls, well, people call branch all the time, so you think they're gonna help, but it's not. But you had like mentors that kind of guide you, like, hey, you know, Sergeant Major, first sergeant or specialist or staff sergeant or chief or whatever, Parsons. This is what I need you to do. This is what you need to do to get to the next level.
Yeah, so really, when I was coming up, you know, I'd heard about mentors and stuff like that, and I didn't really, it didn't really click with me. Like, there wasn't anybody that I sought out to, like, hey, what did you do?
Mm-hmm.
Or, you know, I was fortunate that I had leaders that had kind of the same, I guess, the same outlook or the same view that I had. And I tell people, you know, a lot of folks won't believe it, and she'll be the one to tell you. You know, when I was, she didn't know me when I was a private, but as a young soldier, I had the same exact personality that I have now. I was no different. Like I didn't change as I grew up. I was still, I kind of had the warped sense of humor, you know, and had the same belief system of what you should do, you know. And, you know, when I was younger and didn't have any rank, that created physical strength because I did a lot of push-ups and a lot of, but I was fortunate that, you know, so the first 2 years that I was at Fort Bragg, I was a career PFC for like almost 24 months. I got promoted to PFC like right after I got there. I came in the Army's E2, got promoted to PFC like right after I got to Bragg and stayed at PFC until I went to Italy. And when I got to Italy, I remember the conversation clearly because we got in, it was late at night, and I was just kind of setting up my wall locker, you know, getting everything straight because that's what you do, you know.
Yeah.
Back in the day when you had displays and stuff, and they still do room inspections. And my section chief came in, and a little squirrely dude named Chacona, Staff Sergeant Chacona. And so he's kind of, you know, asked me the same questions and everything.
Get to know you a little bit.
Yeah.
Feeding you, trying to see what your tick marks are and stuff like that.
Right.
You know?
So he's like, you've been in for 2 years now, right? I was like, yes, sir. He's like, why are you still at PFC? And I'm like, so, you know, not really being one to kind of think and game something out and play. I was like, well, because I kind of speak my mind and I say what I'm thinking, and a lot of people don't like that.
Yeah.
And as soon as the words came out of my mouth, I'm like, man, I just screwed myself because I'm here for 2 years. And I remember Staff Sergeant Kona looked at me and he was like, you and I are going to get along just fine. And within 90 days, I got my specialist. And,
Nice.
And then, you know, shortly after that, I made sergeant. Again, back then, though, it was, you know, it wasn't really that I would seek someone out, you know, like, hey, what did you do to get promoted? It was just evident from my first line leaders. You know, my section chief would always, no matter who it was, you know, section chief would always be like, all right, look, this is what you got to do. You know, this is if, you know, and it wasn't really, this is what you want, what you got to do to get promoted or to get ahead. It was, this is what you got to do.
Yeah.
So it's like, you know, okay, you know, and a lot of it was, you know, the physical aspect in the Army never really bothered me much because I grew up as an athlete. But it was, you know, it was just learning that, you know, be really good at your job. Learn everything you can about your job. Know the guy ahead of you, what his job is. And, you know, not only does that help you in the long run of learning more stuff, but it helps you do your job better. Mm-hmm. And we used to do a thing in Italy that it was stuck with me my whole career. When we weren't deployed, because we stayed gone in Vicenza a lot because we couldn't shoot in Italy at the time. So we would, you know, go to different exercises in different countries. But we used to do this thing when we were at home stations. We would take 13 Bravos off the gun line. We'd set up the gun line out in the area we call the North 40. We'd take fisters and put them in the FDC and on the gun line. We'd take gun guys, put them in FDC and put them in the TFSO and do all that. And we would cross train.
Yeah.
And, you know, that helped a lot because you could look at, hey, if I'm on a gun crew, what can I do to save FDC a little time?
Yes.
Right.
The Fisters were like, hey, how can we speed up missions by, and we learned a lot like that. And it was really, again, it wasn't individual mentorship of what I should be doing. It was just like, hey, just keep doing this stuff.
Yeah.
And, my dad gave me some advice when I went in the Army. He told me, and I guess he's probably the best mentor. But he would tell me, or what he told me is go to every school. So no matter if it's bus driver school, can crushing school, if it's a school you don't even care about, if they offer you a school, take it. And he said, because the first thing is, you might learn something that you might not need now, but you can use later in your career.
Absolutely.
The second thing was you get a break from the unit for a week or 2 weeks or 10 days or whatever, because you're off with other people. Yeah. And while you're off with other people, you're talking to these people from other units, and you're getting other experience. So I think that was probably two of the biggest things that I did for mentorship. Now, I didn't really seek out anybody, as far as, hey, what can I do to get promoted? Because it was pretty clear. Yeah. It's like you knew if you were a platoon sergeant or if you were a section chief, you knew you had to be the best section chief, become the senior section chief in order to get in line to be a gunnery sergeant.
Absolutely.
And I had a gunnery sergeant that anytime we'd have downtime, it started out where he would come and get me, but then eventually I knew he was going to always come get me. So I started going in and, he'd take me out to the aiming circle and show me stuff. So as a gun chief, I was learning how to do that. Yeah. When I was a gunnery sergeant, and all the gunnery sergeants out there are going to love this, you don't really do squat when you're in the field. And once you got your recon,
best job in the Army. Gunnery sergeant is the best job in the Army.
Actually, I thought it made it difficult when I was the first sergeant with my gunnery sergeant.
Well, so what I used to
best
do
job in the Army
is, back in the day in the light vehicles, they'd have the chart set up in the back of the Humvee for the FDC. That's where, or in the trailer rather. Yep. That's where I would sleep. So when I was a gunnery sergeant, I'd take my whoopee and I'd crawl in there. That's where I'd catch my cat nap. And while I was back at the FDC, I would tell the FDC chief, hey, how do you do this? Yeah. So he taught me how to lay a chart and do all that stuff when I was a gunnery sergeant.
Charts and darts.
So when I became a platoon sergeant, now instead of FDC being that black magic tent at the back of the fire,
right, you can't go check.
Now you know what they're doing.
I know, hey, what is going on?
And I had a fantastic FDC chief, Zimmerman, at the time, but he hated it because he couldn't blow smoke up my ass.
Yeah.
And I used to tell him, "You're my 7th gun section now."
Yeah.
I said, "I know the gun line."
Yeah.
And I said, "The gun line, they'll take care of themselves. I'll walk down there and make sure everything's met, but I'm going to come back here and check the same thing with you." And so that was, that's kind of how it developed throughout. And I think mentorship wise, as far as, hey, what do I need to be doing for my career? I don't think I really did that until I was a sergeant major. And I remember the phone call. I was at Fort Hood, and it was my 2nd brigade, because we were only supposed to get 1 brigade and then we were done, but somehow I got picked up for a 2nd brigade. And I had a peer of mine call me and say, "Hey, how'd your interview go for the Fort Sill job, for the Field Artillery sergeant?" And I'm like, "I didn't have an interview." I was like, "What?"
That's a real good question. How did that
go? I'm like, "Wow," so
that position had already been filled just a couple months ago, so
that was with Big M, right? With Big M, he was transitioned out.
So no, it was before that. The first time was before that.
Yeah.
So the job was the Field Artillery, or was the Fort Sill position.
Yes.
At first.
Yeah.
And I didn't get a phone call on either one of those jobs. So I reached out to Sam Young. Sam Young and I were OCs together at JRTC.
Yeah.
And he was, at the time, I think he was, he might have been he was the 3rd Army Sergeant Major or 1st Army Sergeant Major. It was a 3-star position, I think.
Yeah.
So I called Sammy, and I'm like, "Hey, brother," I said, I need some advice. He's like, "What?" And I was like, "Well, I said, I'm on my second brigade. Everybody else gets one. From all my NCOERs and everything else says I'm doing good. I was like, but I'm not, the two top positions in the field artillery, I didn't even get on the list.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't even considered. I was like, is my time done?
Yeah.
He's like, well, I don't know, And Sam always shoots to me straight,
Yeah, he shot to me straight too all the time.
He's like, no. He goes, well, I wouldn't say you're done. I'm like, dude, look, if the writing's on the wall, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I just need someone to tell me that so I can, so I can kind of plan.
So I can start making plans.
That my life's going in
Things to do.
Yeah. So he was like, he goes, it's kind of a hard thing because of the position that I was in, and he kind of laid it out for me where I made it right, So I spent a lot of time in one place. Well, not necessarily light, and you build up a great reputation. Well, then I go, my first brigade was in First Army.
Yeah.
So I go to First Army. Now I'm one of 16.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Sergeant Major has to rack and stack his subordinate Sergeant Majors, So I go from being, or anybody, you go from being top of your game at Fort wherever, and now you're here with, somebody else. And if that timing doesn't work out, they don't know you from Adam.
Yeah.
Right.
And I've never been that guy that's kind of, I'm just kind of I was always kind of the guy I thought was just doing my job.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't, hey, look at me doing my job kind of thing. And so he had a conversation with, and he kind of calmed me down a little bit. But he had a conversation with Sergeant Major Smith, who was the 3-Corps Sergeant Major at the time. And he told him, he's like, when Parsons was with me, in First Army, of the 16 Sergeant Majors, he said, I had him as one of 16. So he was my top guy. He said, but now he's there. You've got 35, because, all the separate brigades at Hood.
Yeah.
He said, you got 35 guys. He's like, I just asked you to give him consideration, because I didn't know Smith from Adam, I mean, I was a light guy my whole time, and then all of a sudden I'm in first cat.
Yeah. I
was like, what the hell is this? What are those things?
And matter of fact, I think we had a conversation about that. He was like, because remember I was telling you I wanted to go back to 25th, 211, and you said, hey man, why are you going to, you was the first sergeant as an E7, right? I was an E7 first sergeant in Fort Lewis. And then I came to FACO. And then I wanted to go back to 25th. Because I was just coming out of being the first. I'm like, I'm ready to go back in. But what happened, he said, why would you do that? Get yourself diversified. Mm-hmm. You got to diversify yourself. Go stay, a first sergeant is a first sergeant is a first sergeant. Stay in, at SIL and be a first sergeant there. And that's what I did.
Yeah.
You see, and that's what you were talking to me about, being diversified.
So I, while I was at, and then I was at Hood for 2 years. About a year into it, and by then Smith had got to know me. The division sergeant major knew who I was, and they knew what I could do. But the where it really came down, because now I'm in the nominative realm, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, what do I do for nominative?
Yeah.
And had a great division sergeant major. Bardicky was an armor guy, but still I liked him. No, he was a good dude. We were friends up until both of us retired. I mean, he retired out of TRADOC or out of the Pentagon. But he kind of laid it out as like, hey, for nominative, you got to be looking at these other things, and so when the nominative position came up, and you start getting on. The way they changed the CSL, instead of someone saying that's my guy, because it used to be the general officer would be like, hey, I want this guy to be my sergeant major. I want, the CSL would look at, all the division sergeant majors would rack and stack their sergeant majors, and then the corps guys would, do a second rack and stack, and they had all the senior nominative sergeant majors. Medcom, DENTCOM, ForceCom, TRADOC, they would all get together and then they would vote the packets.
Gotcha.
So they would like, hey, we have this position open. And they would say, okay, we got these 5 guys meet the criteria, the best criteria for this position.
Yeah.
And they would go around the room. All right, do you know this guy? What can you say to tell about this guy? Because it's not all just on paper. Reputation was a big part of it. And it's not really who you know, because if the guy was a great guy but he wasn't good at his job, there was no way to be able to, you know, kind of. And a lot of folks had that, you know, well, you got to know somebody. No, they got to know you.
Yeah.
You know, it's your reputation.
Yeah.
So again, I wasn't getting any phone calls, you know, and so this was right around the same time that the field artillery positions, both of them came open and got selected, and I didn't even get an interview. And so I'm thinking my time's done. Well, Division Sergeant Major was TDY, or had to go TDY, and Sergeant Major Schroeder was Force Comm Sergeant Major at the time, and he was coming to Fort Hood for a tour. So I got tapped to sit in for the Division Sergeant Major. So, you know, I get to hang out with Sergeant Major Schroeder. Never met the guy before in my life. You know?
Yeah.
Does his, you know, I knew of him. I knew his reputation. And so he does his LPD. And then, you know, it's like his itinerary was he wanted to go out and look at Bradley Gunnery. So I took him out to Bradley Gunnery. And while we were at Bradley Gunnery, I actually, you know, the Brigade Sergeant Major, the 3CR was out there at the time. And my next door neighbor, Baker, who was he was the 101st Division Sergeant Major, and now he's working with I think material was
the material.
the new one
Up in Chicago?
capabilities.
Is the one in Chicago?
I think
Yeah,
it's the capabilities thing. But anyways, so Brian was out there and Barker, and so we're just three of us talking, you know, and I'm sitting here talking about Bradley Gunnery and, you know, the qualifications and stuff, and, you know, how to enter. Because it's just, you know, when I got to Fort Hood, I was like, well, I need to learn this cab stuff because we fight different in the cab, you know.
Yeah.
So we were having that conversation out there, and then we were riding back, and I was like, I asked Sergeant Major Schroeder, I'm like, hey, can I ask you a question?
To be blunt.
And he,
You gotta get it out there,
He was
though.
like, go ahead. I was like, look, I was like, you know, the way the CSL works for nominative, or not CSL, but the way the nominative system works for Sergeant Majors, I was like, understand you want to pick the best guys, but there's no communication coming back to folks like, you know, and I explained my situation. I'm like, you know, here I am, by all accounts, I'm a halfway decent field artilleryman. I said, but the top two jobs in the field artillery came open and I wasn't even on the slate.
Mm-hmm.
So Schroeder was like, you know what? He goes, send me your NCOERs, your last 5 NCO, you know, everything that they have in packet. So I sent it to him. About a week later, I get an email back. He's like, I took a look into it. He said, he's like, everything you have? He's like, you're good. He said, I actually looked at the board results, and, you know, you were voted like, I think it was like 9 out of 10 on the last 2 boards. I was like, well, why didn't I get a phone call? He's like, trust me, it'll happen.
Yeah.
You know, he said, you just got to be. I was like, okay. Well, then the job came open at Fort Sill, and well, the first job was NTC. Well, I did. So I interviewed with, at the time, General Martin, who knew me because when we were first cab party, every time a cab unit would go, Colonel Gaden and I would go and spend time with Field Artillery Battalion and, you know, the OCs.
Yeah.
It got to the point where I was, where we get to NTC, they used to have, they have protocol drivers.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, you'd come and there'd be a guy that would drive you around, and it came to a point where they would give me my own vehicle and my own radio. Because I knew my way around the box, I knew all the checking, I'd been in OC before, so I would call Sergeant Major Matthias at Audi.
Audi, yeah, I know him.
He's retired here in Texas.
Is he?
And so I call Audi, it's like, hey, we're coming in on such and such a day. And he was like, all right, I said, I got my own knobs and stuff, I just need a radio and a vehicle. And I'd call and check in, go in the box, I'd free range, you know, it was like, it was awesome, because I could get to go see what I wanted to see. At the time, we had to avoid General Milley, though, because General Milley wasn't big on Davardi doing the role that Davardi was trying to do.
And then 9 weeks later, the basics you done. And then 5 weeks later, I'm in Unit 1 like you son of a what? This body boy done earned him a gun. Make you think about home and who all lost their life to a gun. Shit.